Welcome. This is the virtual tour of the Undesign the Redline exhibit. We're going to start here. There are 5 parts. The first part is a little bit of the history of redlining. The second part is more of a local look at how redlining affected Omaha, Lincoln, and Council Bluffs. The third part is a timeline of American history from about 1800 to the present day. The fourth part is a living archive, so some more local stories. And the fifth part is how do we undesign the redline? So now that we've learned about it, how do we go forward? And as the director here says, once you see redlining, you can't unsee it. So it's going to probably change the way that you look at the city that you live in. So I'm going to start here with this placard here, Undesign the Redline. I just want to read it out loud to kind of set the scene for what we're going to get into. Gone unanswered are fundamental questions about our communities, how do we get here, and what does that mean for where we are going? Systematic challenges today, like inequalities in housing, education, income, criminal justice, and health, are far from separate issues. These challenges are rooted in a deep and entangled history of policies, practices, and processes that remain unrevealed and misunderstood. As new forces begin to transform cities and towns, decisions about interconnected challenges are therefore often made in the dark. Undesign the Redline explores these reframed opportunities from a shared value perspective and grounds discussions about race, wealth, opportunity, and power in an honest context that is not about guilt and blame. This allows everyone to contribute their value to the design and development of projects, partnerships, and decisions that seek to transform communities and move beyond the challenging and often clouded situation of our entangled past. So there we go. This exhibit was put together by Designing the We. They are an organization out of the Bronx, New York, and they have created similar exhibits like this one in cities across the country. All right, so the backstory of redlining. If you were here, I would ask you, who's heard of redlining? And then I would blink at you like Dora on the old shows and wait for you to respond. All right, so it goes way back to the 1930s. So picture of the United States in the 1930s, it's the Depression. We're trying to get out of that, and we have a president that has the New Deal. You probably heard of that. And one of the initiatives as part of the New Deal and how to get the economy back going was to really promote home ownership, because a lot of industries are involved in that. It creates a lot of jobs. It gets money flowing. And it was during a time in our history where we're kind of in an ideological battle with communism. And so home ownership was like, yes, capitalism, this is it. Let's get everybody invested in it. So to do that, the country needed a way to assess risk of who was safe and not safe to loan money to, because the federal government was going to back these mortgages. And because it's America and it was the 30s, race was baked into the process of assessing risk. So across the country, about 239 cities, they made these risk assessment maps. And they divided up the cities, and they got information from local businessmen and bankers and real estate agents about where was safe to lend to. And there was a 4-part scale. Green was the best. It was very safe, definitely backed mortgages there. Blue was, it's okay, it's all right. Pretty safe, but not as good as green. Yellow was very risky. Like if anything changes in that neighborhood anytime soon, it's not going to be safe to lend to. And red was the worst. Don't loan anything to anyone that lives there. And what did they base this on? Basically race and environmental hazards. So they did these little surveys and area descriptions of different parts of each town, of each city, and they'd want to know what kind of occupations the people that lived there had, if they were foreign born. This was a time before ethnic whites like Irish and Italian and Polish, before they were considered white. So that was also something that they were concerned about. It was also before Catholicism was widely accepted. So if there were Irish Catholic people there, that would knock down their score. And they were really concerned with detrimental influences, which basically meant people of color and Negro infiltration, because they believed at that time that having black people in a neighborhood would decrease property values. So even though we don't have these maps anymore, the way that it was set up still affects neighborhoods and cities today. And the whole process of redlining kind of embodies a process that transformed explicit racism into structural racism. These structural conditions largely remain today. So explicit means people are saying mean words and being mean to your face. And structural racism means it doesn't matter how nice or kind or good or bad the people within the system work, it's still going to have racist outcomes. So the first example here is a map of the Bronx, New York, one of the 5 boroughs, and it's the original map from the 1930s, their redlining map, and then overlaid are the different issues that still affect these areas, even though this map is no longer in use. So to kind of situate you to the map, so this is the Bronx, it's above Manhattan, it's the 5th borough. Down here is the South Bronx, that's where hip hop started, that's where J-Lo is from. A lot of cool stuff happened here. Above here, you get into the suburbs, Westchester, super, super white right in here. We can see like here, the South Bronx is all red. So they've decided detrimental influences, Negro infiltration, we're not gonna lend money there. And those areas are still affected today. So we have planned shrinkage. So if you've ever seen movies from like the 70s and 80s of New York and everything looks like garbage and everything's on fire, that's because the city ran out of money and they just stopped providing services for certain parts of the city. So like the Bronx was literally on fire for years because they did not provide like fire department services. Another issue is that so if you can't get a regular home loan, because this is all about getting people home loans, then you can only get like a contract loan, which is kind of like rent to own, but for a house. But the downside is that you don't build equity in your home and you can lose your house if you miss a payment. So it's a very precarious position. And so because people are kind of locked out of the regular banking and the regular mortgages, they can fall prey to predatory banking. So that means like if like pawn shops, check cashing, all of those kinds of businesses move into these areas because they are cut off from the other services that other areas enjoy. Deindustrialization. So back in like the 30s and 40s and 50s, we were still making and manufacturing a lot of things in the United States. And the plants or the factories would usually be located in redlined areas because nobody wants to live near those. So that's where they put people they didn't care about. So, but after all of those jobs left, that they lost the tax base, and that's why a lot of cities started to kind of crumble in the 60s, 70s, and 80s because they didn't have all that money coming in from the different factories and stuff. The structural situation by these created by these programs remains the same. So the thing is, in the United States, the American dream got linked up with home ownership. And if people are cut out from that, even though it was the 30s and 40s and 50s, they will not be able to build generational wealth because you can get a lot of wealth out of owning your home. And if your grandparents or your parents or your great-grandparents were cut out from that, then you wouldn't be able to build that wealth over generations. And no amount of like current income or education can bridge that gap. They've kind of gotten a head start. So the second part. So here we are at local maps of our area. We have Omaha, Lincoln, and Council Bluffs. And if you could take a moment, you want to look closely at this map of Omaha and see. If you were here, we would ask you to indicate like where you live or where you've lived in the past, and to kind of think about if that area has changed since this map was made in 1938. We are located here, and it used to be called the near north side of North Omaha. As you can see, it is red. The other red areas are down here by like where where the stockyards used to be. Because it was another industry that is an environmental hazard, and that's when a lot of African Americans were allowed to like work in the stockyards. So they designated that area as not good. Also up in here, we'd have some like lead smelting. So we did a lot of things with lead in the past, and that kind of got into the air and into the soil, and that can lead to later environmental consequences to the people that live in those areas, like lead poisoning that affects children's cognition for the rest of their lives. Each city, they had a survey and they had area descriptions, like what kind of people live there, is it desirable, and like I said, they would ask local people, local businessmen and stuff, what they thought of the area. Between 1934 and 1962, the federal government backed $120 billion of home loans, and more than 98% of them went to white home buyers. And this also includes, if you think about the GI Bill, so when soldiers were coming back from World War II and they were given subsidies and help getting home loans and help getting college tuition paid for, those services were not, and resources were not offered to African American soldiers coming back. So they were cut out from that opportunity. And the way that this still impacts us today is, like I talked about, generational wealth. So it is, I'm going to read from this from the Washington Post. It is, however, a reality that historic redlining makes home ownership beyond reach for many families in these communities today, regardless of how big banks behave now. If your family was denied a mortgage in the 1930s or the 1950s or the 1970s, then you may not have the family wealth or down payment help to become a homeowner today. In that way, the consequences of past redlining trends in time, even as new forms of it continue. So it's still impacting us today. This is a little blow-up picture of the underwriting manual. So even if they didn't have the redlining map, people that were doing real estate at that time, 30s and 40s and 50s, they'd have to refer to this manual, because this is how they decided who to give loans to and who the federal government would back in those loans. And part of the property value, they believed at that time, was based on if black people lived there. And they were tested on that before they got their real estate license. And I'm going to read to you something about race and property value from a book from 1910. And it says that the colored people certainly have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but they must recognize the economic disturbance which their presence in white neighborhoods causes and forego their desire to split off from the established district where the rest of their race lives. So we get that you want the American dream, but you impact property values. It was a myth, it's still a myth, but if enough people believe in it, then it becomes true. So we're gonna go to the third part, the timeline. The bottom is literally grassroots, so bottom-up responses to the things that are happening at the top. You will see that at the top it says separate and unequal, and it kind of stays that way through each era. It starts in between 1800 and 1930. So this is the time between, we still had slavery, we go through the Civil War, we get emancipation, we get up to the Great Depression, and there's a lot of how America is going to define race and how that's going to impact its citizens. A lot of that framework is happening right in here. So there's the Native American genocide. We're removing people from their land. We're forcing them to leave. We're putting them on reservations. We are defining what the white race is. So there's a court case from 1922 about a Japanese immigrant applying for citizenship, and that's when they declare that white has to be Caucasian. So it's not even just skin color, it's an idea of Europe. So all this is happening mostly in the South, and so we have the Great Migration. So we have a lot of African Americans moving from the South up to the North, and so now the North has to kind of figure out what they're going to do about race and how they're going to codify that. Some of the ways that happens is sundown towns. There are towns, like if you've ever gone on a road trip, this surprises some people, I guess, when I talk about it in the tours. But if I'm ever on a long road trip, if I have to stop for gas, I will not stop in a small dinky town. They scared me, and I didn't know exactly why. But there were sundown towns. So basically places, if you were black, you should not be there after the sun goes down. And we have them, we had them in Nebraska, they're all over. But they were just places that you knew you can't go there. And later on, they would have the Green Book, which was a book, it's kind of like Yelp or like customer reviews of different hotels, motels, gas stations, restaurants, places across the United States that African Americans could utilize on their family road trips because they weren't welcome everywhere. So while all this is going on, we do have people trying to achieve that American dream. So we have Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So black people got together, they had their own part of town, they had their own shops, like businesses, churches, schools, everything. There was a lot of wealth built up, and that really upset people in the area. And so through mob violence, they destroyed and set on fire Black Wall Street. So it's not there anymore. So there'll be several times where Black people are trying to rise up and do their own thing, and they'll be shot down. Racial covenants. So in 1917, there is a Supreme Court ruling that we can't have restrictive zoning based on race, because what if a white family wants to actually sell their home to a Black family? We can't stop that from happening. So to get around that, we have racial covenants, which is basically in the deed to your home, it says that you will not sell your home to a person not of the Caucasian race. So that cut out, even though there wasn't a big sign that says no Black people welcome, just each family, each deed said that you couldn't sell it to a Black person. The New Deal, in order to get it passed, to create the social safety net for American citizens, concessions were made in the Senate and the Congress to exclude certain parts of the population. And they figured out a way that to get Southern representatives to vote for the measures, if they didn't have Social Security applied to agricultural and domestic workers, because those were the fields of work that Black people in the South were usually in. So it did not apply to sharecroppers, it didn't apply to maids, anything that Black people usually did, they didn't get a part of the social safety net. The term is coined in the 1960s by a community activist named John McKnight. So it refers to the practice of 9 loans, like we've talked about in the beginning. But even after that part, it limits who can build wealth through home ownership, and it continues to affect that area over time. So, for example, even if it's not on a map now, your insurance for your car or for your home will be higher. If you're in one of the areas that was originally redlined, you might not get certain services. The first time I'd heard of it, I heard from a teenager that gave talks on racial reconciliation and oppression. And the way that he described it was, because he lived in the projects in New Orleans and he couldn't get pizza delivered. And I was in college at that time, so that completely blew my mind that was really real to me. So pizza will not get delivered. You won't get the newspaper delivered. People, if back when there were more taxis and not Ubers, they wouldn't take you there. So it affects your day-to-day life, even if you're not an adult and trying to get a mortgage. And it's also interesting if you look at current maps, for COVID-19, for the coronavirus, if you want to check what areas of your city are most impacted by the disease and its aftermath, and kind of overlay that with the old-timey maps, it's kind of eerie. So we've got panic. So we figured out we're getting our homes. It's the 50s and the 60s. We're living in these all-white neighborhoods because we put it into our restrictive covenants. But it's kind of, as West Omaha, if you think about Omaha, it keeps going west. People keep moving away, farther and farther away from the city centers. And speculative, a lot of our history is built on people speculating, what can make money fast, what's going to work. One of the ways to do that was through block busting. So I'm going to read you this thing from the Saturday Evening Post. It says, "Would you panic if a Negro moved next door? I'm broad-minded," said one homeowner when Negroes moved into his block, but a short time later he panicked and sold his house at a loss. In this week's post, you'll read how speculators decide which blocks are ripe for racial change, how they use vicious tactics to force out the whites, and how one speculator brags that he could bust your block in no time at all. So they played on the fear that people had of decreasing home values. And sometimes they would pay people to drive up and down the street in cars, blasting music. They would pay Black women to push buggies with their kids in them. They would have people call the house and ask for stereotypical Black names, which at that time was Johnny May. Is Johnny May there? They think Black people live here. Oh no, let's sell our house. So they undersold the homes, and then they flipped, and then they were overcharging the Black people that would live there next. You can see this in Chicago suburbs. My extended family lives there, and they can remember where the suburb that they lived in, as it got blacker, and they remember there's one white family left. So it's definitely a flip.